Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate. Today we got more information as to what's going to be happening into the Atlantic Basin with all the tropical activity, potential tropical systems to come along there. We also have some more information as to those tropical systems out in the Pacific as to whether or not they will impact Hawaii and how strong they will be. So if you guys are new to my channel, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family, and on social media. Also follow me on social media. Link is all in the description down below. I also have timestamps for all the stuff that I'm going to be going over in this video. I have all these different parts at the top right hand part of your screen. Part 1 is going to be the US severe weather, just general look over as to what's going to be happening over the next couple of days. Part 2 is going to be obviously the tropical update, the main portion of the video, which is why we have the gif of the eye of a hurricane there. That's Hurricane Dorian for any of you who are curious. Part 3 is going to be the earthquake map because that's going to be a new normal. We're just going to be looking across the United States and see what earthquakes have been popping off recently. And then part 4 is a couple YouTube channel updates. Nothing too big to report there. My weather take of the day for all of you, just a question as to what you guys think is, what do you think will happen within the next month for tropical weather? Do you think we'll see a significant uptrend in tropical systems? And if so, how many tropical systems do you think we're going to be able to see here within the next month? All right, first things first, let's talk about the severe weather threat. Day 2 outlook here for Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021. We have a 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale here over in Oregon. Yeah, I know, kind of a rare place to find a severe risk up in the Northwest, but there we go. We have it up there. Not a major risk expected with that. We also have a bunch of these light green areas, which is just a general thunderstorm risk. Nothing too significantly severe, but it does warrant for some sort of rain. Now, the interesting thing about this risk is that there's only one risk with it, one main severe risk, and that is a 5% chance for 58-mile-per-hour wind gusts or above. No real chance for hail or tornadoes. Can't really rule them out either, but I just think it will be mainly a wind risk, and so does the Storm Prediction Center. Here's the high temperatures expected for Tuesday, and we can see that it's been basically much of the same for the most part. The Northwest is continuing to stay relatively warm. As a matter of fact, everywhere on the western side of the United States is relatively hot, and I know the monsoon has been basically clearing out little bits and bobs of drought for the Southwest. Might be seeing some more of those very hot temperatures again with less amounts of rain. You guys might start to see a bit more rain, though, into the mid parts of August. We'll talk about that a little bit more into the video, but it's still not a huge relief due to the fact that there are most temperatures here above triple digits. Then we also have the plains, 80s and 90s across the board. Great Lakes, 70s and 80s, high 70s, low to mid 80s across the board there. Further north, you get it tends to get a little bit hotter, which is not exactly the case in most scenarios, but that's just how it is for tomorrow's high temperatures. Northwest into the mid-Atlantic, expecting around mid to high 70s to low 80s across the board over there. Very comfortable for the most part, expecting that to kind of stay for a little bit longer before we start to get into a bit of a higher pressure action to where we can see a little bit higher temperatures and then another cool down to come later. Then, of course, the South is going to continue to stay the South, relatively hot, 80s to 90s across the board, specifically if you're closer towards the coast. You do have a lot of showers and thunderstorms that could create some flash flood activity over there. So if you do see a flooded roadway, please turn around and don't drown. Don't drive into flooded roadways because of two things. Number one, roadways typically seem to be a lot shallower than they actually are. So if you drive into them, then you might actually get stuck. And number two, if you somehow do manage to start driving through and you stay afloat, water can get into the engine of your car and start frying up circuits, leaving your car stranded, even if you still can drive through it. Well, you obviously won't be able to drive through it if your car is dead. So just don't risk it. Please find another roadway. Even if it's just, you're a little bit late to wherever you're getting to, that much is well worth living, rather than just taking the risk and driving through major roadways. Now, here's the day 3 outlook here for Wednesday, August 4th, and just much of the same except for no real severe risk. Across the board, there's a giant thunderstorm risk. Same old here in the southeast. It's going to typically be that way for the next, I'd say, the next couple of days, to where you guys could see shower after shower after shower, creating some localized flooding issues. And then even the central plains could even get some showers and thunderstorms. High temperatures again, very much so, worse than it already was down towards the Grand Canyon in that general vicinity near Death Valley. And so expect relief to not be there for you all yet, especially around Las Vegas. You guys are going to be getting a lot more heat coming your way. As a matter of fact, across the board here in the West, relief will most likely not be coming. So these hot temperatures from the upper 80s to even triple digits within that span, don't expect that to go away anytime soon. Central Plains, here you go. This is your 80s to 90s again that we were typically talking about. Same thing for the Deep South, 80s to 90s. Mid-Atlantic is starting to warm up just a teeny smidge. It starts to get up into the 80s and even 90s in localized areas. And so this is what I was talking about, to where you guys are going to have a little bit of a warm-up, but there might be a bit of a cool down later on. So just, bear with it for a little bit. If you don't really like the heat all too much, make sure you drink a lot of water. Heat exhaustion is real. And the other thing is, make sure you don't leave your kids or pets in cars if you're going to be out for a little bit of time, unless if you keep it on and you turn on the air conditioning. But other than that, just please remember those things as you take this into consideration. All right. Part 2, tropical weather. That was probably the quickest I've ever been through severe weather in my entire existence on YouTube. So applaud for that here real quickly. Applaud for that. Here's the tropical weather here. Tropical update for the Atlantic. The National Hurricane Center is actually looking at an area here just off the coast of Africa. This tropical wave that we've been talking about within the past video that we had on, what was it, Sunday, I believe it was, or Saturday. We uploaded it Saturday night. Most people probably watched it Sunday morning, but this is what we were talking about, this nice little area of interest that has a 10% chance of formation over the next 2 days, 20% chance of formation over the next 5 days. But other than that, pretty quiet across the board here. Nothing really too close to home, and nothing really out in the middle of nowhere either. So it's just one of those things where we need to continue to watch for this activity off of Africa, because this will eventually meander its way closer and closer towards the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, even closer to home, either up the coast or further on through into the Gulf. So really need to watch out for that within these next few weeks. Here's the Pacific, and this quite the opposite to the Atlantic. I mean, look at this. We got 4 different areas to talk about. We have from weakest to strongest, we have this little area of interest that has a 0% chance of formation over the next 2 days, 20% chance of formation over the next 5 days. I'm actually expecting this to increase as time moves along, but the thing of it is that it most likely will form a little bit later than 5 days, probably 6, 7, 8 days, and you'll be able to see that within the models that we'll show later on in the video. We also have remnants of Tropical Depression 9E out in front. This thing has deteriorated to a post-tropical cyclone, but it might be expected to revamp itself a little bit later. It has a 60% chance of formation over the next 2 and 5 days, so we'll have to watch out for that as this continues to get closer and closer to Hawaii. We also have Tropical Storm Ignacio that was Invest 91E, now that is formed into a tropical storm. And so that will kind of do the tango with Hilda a little bit. You'll see that in the models as well, which, speaking of Hilda, we do also have Hurricane Hilda over here. So a lot of stuff to talk about here for the Eastern Pacific. Will that impact Hawaii? We'll have to see here later on in a bit. Speaking of Hawaii, here's the Central Pacific map here, and they actually don't have that the remnants of Tropical Depression 9E out in front. They probably should change that because it does have a high chance of forming again. I do actually anticipate that to potentially become an organized tropical system again, but as I mentioned in my last video, not expecting it to be all too significant strength-wise. But here's Hilda, and you can see it's still pretty far away from Hawaii, so there is about, I'd say, a week to a week and a half notice for the people of Hawaii to really start to get a grasp of this system as this continues to move about. Now here's Ignacio. This is the forecast cone for Ignacio, and it's not expected to do a whole lot, I should say. Maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, minimum pressure of 1,004 millibars, moving west-northwest at 9 miles per hour. And so it's just not expected to do a whole lot. The cone of uncertainty here, which, don't exactly take the cone of uncertainty as whatever is in the middle, that is most likely the area to which it will hit every single time. The cone of uncertainty basically says that anywhere within that cone, you know, it could be here, it could be here, it could be here, here. That's where they think has the highest likelihood of where the center area of low pressure could actually go to. So remember that from now on, whenever I talk about the cone of uncertainty and the track of these tropical systems, is that it's not just the area in the center of all of it, it could be the areas all around it too. So something to keep in mind with all of that. But another thing to mention here is that it does seem to go into a weakening trend after this. We're talking about here in the latter stages of tomorrow morning into tomorrow night, to where it will become a tropical depression. That's what the D with the black circle means. The D with the white circle means that it actually becomes a post-tropical cyclone. So it's expected to weaken even further as it continues to get on closer towards Wednesday morning into Wednesday evening. Now, if we take a look at the satellite imagery here, the infrared satellite or the IR imagery, you can see that there's a lot of strong cloud tops here. The reason why we actually look at infrared satellite is because we want to take a look at how cold the tops of these thunderstorms actually are. And typically what indicates stronger thunderstorms is these really tall thunderstorms that really bulk up. And so typically, whenever you go higher and higher up in the sky, the colder and colder it is. And so when you see these very cold temperatures here at the tops of these thunderstorms, it typically indicates that we do have some strong thunderstorm activity or some very deep convection ongoing within this. So we do have some strong thunderstorm activity with this. Very good ventilation. You can see these little feathers coming off of the tropical system and this in this anticyclonic flow, more or less, as we like to call it. And typically whenever you see that, my bad, I'll have to go backwards. There you go. Typically whenever you see that, this does mean that it does have a nice center of low pressure, and it actually is exhausting itself with some decent amounts of energy. But as I mentioned, not exactly expected to do a whole lot. If we take a look at the water vapor imagery, there is a lot of moisture with this thing too. You could even see Hilda as the counterpart next to Ignacio, but a lot of moisture here, so not expected to get into a whole lot of dry air. There is a nice little trough out in front of this though, so if this thing does continue to move off to the north and west, it will interact with that trough and potentially weaken even further. Just because there's going to be a lot of wind shear here and a lot of dry air right next to it, which is the reason why there's a lot of this black shade off of the top left part of your screen. And so there's a lot of factors here to talk about with this thing. And the other thing too here is that if we take a look at the microwave satellite imagery here, which basically does the same thing as the infrared satellite, it takes a look at the temperature tops of these thunderstorms, and it tells us where the strongest convection could be. This just basically makes it a whole lot easier for us rather than just seeing a bunch of clouds and stuff. And so a lot of this red, dark red, shows that it's some very, very cold tops here of these thunderstorms. Very strong, deep convection, but nothing really all too organized. You see there's a little bit of this spin right within here. So maybe some inflow trying to get into this thing, but it's not as organized as, say, a high-end tropical storm or even a hurricane. So we don't see a bit of an eye or a center of low pressure where the thunderstorms would be circling it. But otherwise, we do have the spaghetti models here to track out this thing as to where this will be going. And according to the GEFS, this thing isn't really going to go places to impact areas. I mean, you see Baja California here off to the north and east of it, but this thing doesn't really travel all too far. I mean, it's supposed to be going on a weakening trend according to this model. If we even go off to the multi-spaghetti models, most of this actually say that it will end up just kind of stalling out here right within this area. Some others still think that it's going to continue to move off to the north and west, but I did talk about that trough and that dry air as to how that could potentially rip apart the storm, and seems how it typically doesn't like a lot of wind shear. It doesn't like any dry air. It'll be heading off into that very unfavorable environment, and so this thing will most likely begin to deteriorate as this continues to head off into that general vicinity. And most of the models tend to agree with me on saying that. If we take a look at the model intensity guidance here, all this green area here is tropical storm strength. So we already know it's a tropical storm. The National Hurricane Center did initiate that for all of us to see. And most of these models think that it's going to get below that green area into this white area where it's more into a tropical depression territory. So that's the one thing that most of the models, if not all the models, are agreeing with. This model right here, the CEM2, still thinks it's going to be around tropical storm strength, but I do believe that this thing will most likely begin to deteriorate as this continues to progress in its lifespan. I also do have the Saffir-Simpson, I should say, hurricane wind scale here off to the right, just for anyone who is curious as to what each category is for a hurricane. I don't have the tropical storm strength up here, although just remember it is 73 mile per hour winds and below. That is a tropical storm strength. And then you also have 40 mile per hour winds and below with that as well. Now, most of this here within the model intensity guidance this is measuring in knots. So we also have this on the right-hand side here in knots. Actually, you'll see that most of the stuff in weather is actually utilized in knots as well. So we decided to put that up there as well. And you can see within this that this is 35 knots and below is when it's tropical depression, or 34 knots and below is tropical depression. Tropical storm is 35 knots and above. And once it gets up to hurricane strength, that'll be 64 knots to 72 knots. So something interesting to point out with that. All right, here's the remnants of Tropical Depression 9E. And this thing is looking a lot better than when we saw it last. I mean, if we remember the last video, we didn't have as many thunderstorms or even convection as it did. And now we've got some very strong thunderstorms off to the north of the center of low pressure. We got thunderstorms off to the south. And we even have some activity here in the center where we have some very strong convection here with cloud tops and upwards of -80 degrees Celsius. Very high thunderstorms, very strong convection ongoing with that. If we go to the water vapor imagery here, you can see that this thing might be trying to basically interact with some of the dry air. So that's the reason why I do believe that it'll stay in the high tropical depression, low tropical storm strength. If this thing does materialize again, you can notice that most of this this black area here, right out in front of the tropical system, if I actually make a better pen here, you guys will be able to see. This is a lot of the dry air that I was talking about. And so if this dry air starts to seep into this tropical system, you can start to expect the lack of thunderstorm activity to begin to increase within that general area. And so we'll just have to continue to watch out for this as this continues to move about. But a lot of thunderstorm activity right where the remnants are. And if this thing does begin to form a organized center area of low pressure, we could be talking about another tropical depression, maybe even a tropical storm with this as this heads off to the west. Now, the best thing with this is that there are some instances where the satellite actually could be of use to tell us what the surface winds actually are going to be with the storm. They take these nice little passes, and there's some instances where they actually are able to create a nice little area for us to determine as to how strong some of the winds are. Now, some instances could be where it completely misses the tropical system, some instances to where it can get half of it, just like what we got right now, and then there could be some instances to where it can get all of the tropical system. So it's kind of like one of those hit and miss type things with this. But the interesting thing about it is that we do have a bunch of these wind barbs here that are color coordinated. So if you want to see based off of color what the wind speed is, at the bottom is a nice little graphic to determine as to what it is in knots, which is, as I mentioned, most stuff is used in knots and weather. So there is that. But you can see that we have a lot of this red and this dark red over here in the northwestern quadrant of this area of invest in upwards of 25 to 30 knots. So that's right below tropical storm wind strength. Not exactly an organized tropical storm quite yet, although we do have a nice little area of low pressure here with these wind barbs as this continues to move on. Move about and try to organize further. I also have this nice little wind barb description on the right hand side. And the interesting thing about it is I already talked about a bit as to what the strength is with the color coordination. Not really that big of a deal with that. Although if you do want to look into it a little bit more, go ahead and pause the video. But we do have some instances here to where, well, actually, not instances, I should say. We do have a good example as to the direction of the wind speed here. And so if we do have a wind barb like this to where it is pointing out just like that, this wind is moving from the south and east. The flag always has to be on the bottom side. So the way to basically look at it in this instance is this is where the wind starts, which is where the flag is, and it pushes out through into the skinny end of the stick. So what we do see here is if we take that information that we just got from this description, we can then look at these wind barbs and you can see, well, a lot of the wind is moving from the north to the south, and then it starts to curl like this right within here in some areas. Now, there are some areas right here where it actually has a lot of calm wind right within here. A lot of convergence, I should say, right within this area. So it's not exactly a well-organized tropical system by any stretch of the imagination, which is the reason why it's not named, the reason why it's actually not even a tropical depression at the moment, but still something that we're going to have to watch out for as time continues to move about. Same thing with the microwave imagery. Sometimes it gets all the storms, sometimes it doesn't, but there is some deep convection with this across the board here, so we're going to have to watch out for this. If this all starts to converge a bit more, then we could potentially be talking about another tropical system moving closer towards Hawaii. Now, if we time this out here for most of you all, well, not exactly timing out, just showing the spaghetti models and the track of this system, it's really interesting because we have one model that says it could go one way. We have another model that says it could go another. And so with the GEFS, this model says that this thing will actually continue to head a bit further to the west, and then it will curl off to the north and do this kind of loop around. And so it's really interesting to say, to try and watch, because we have, this to where it goes north, and then it goes west, of course. And then we have the Euro, which says this thing will continue to head off due west into the general vicinity of Hawaii. So one model saying it will go basically closer to the northern portions of Hawaii. We have another one that's saying that it will potentially go to the southern portion of Hawaii. And so really interesting to say the least as to what these models are actually going to do. And the same thing for the multi-spaghetti model guidance here. We have some models that say it will go north. We have some models that say it will go west. But for the most part, most of these models do think that this will eventually head off into the general vicinity of Hawaii within the next 168 hours and even further later on than that. So we're going to have to watch out as this continues to get closer and closer to Hawaii. I'll talk a little bit more about my availability as to how I can cover this for you all. But from what the models say right now, there is the potential for this to potentially be impacting that general vicinity. Now, here's the model intensity guidance again. And the interesting thing about it is that most of these models actually think it will become a tropical storm. There are probably 3 or 4 that say it won't and it'll stay in the tropical depression category. But there are a couple that say it will become a tropical storm again. Or not even again, for the first time in its lifespan. So we'll have to continue to watch out for that. But then, as I mentioned before, once it gets into the latter stages of its life, it'll start to interact with unfavorable conditions out into the Pacific Ocean, and it'll begin to deteriorate back again to a tropical depression, more or less, or even a remnant again as it continues to move on through. But the interesting thing that I want to make a note of, just on an unrelated note and an unrealistic note, is this little model right here. I mean, look at this. This thing has a whale of a time. It goes from a tropical depression to a tropical storm all the way to a Category 1 hurricane within the span of 24 hours. I mean, give props to that model for being bold. Holy crap. That is a thing to behold right there. Another thing to behold here, speaking of which, is a tropical storm, not actually tropical storm Hilda anymore, Hurricane Hilda. I didn't get the right graphic here, but it's going to be kind of similar anyways. This is the same thing here. And so this is Monday here, Monday evening, which is what it's about right now. It is a hurricane. It was a 85 mile per hour sustained wind storm. Now it is a 75 mile per hour maximum sustained storm. Minimum pressure of 999 millibars, moving northwest at 7 miles per hour. This thing will be expected to curl off more to a western trajectory a little bit later in the week, and that's when it could start heading off into the general vicinity of Hawaii. So we're going to want to watch out for that as this continues to move about in its life cycle. Here's the infrared satellite on Hilda. You can still see we have a very nice counterclockwise rotation with this, with some decent flow, anticyclonic flow with this. If you see some clouds that start to move a bit like that, very nice flow with this. The ventilation is very good, but the main thing to note of is this nice little counterclockwise spin right within there. And so very nice to see from this tropical system. It does seem to be not exactly the healthiest thing in the world, I should say, but it still is kind of doing its own thing as it continues to progress. Now, the water vapor imagery, a lot of moisture here. We've been talking about how this dry air is a little bit too out in front of Ignacio and Hilda, so not really too much to report with that. We also have the ASCAT winds here, the satellite winds that are showing the surface winds across the board for the most part. We do have some winds that are in upwards of 40 to 45 knots within this area, so not exactly hurricane strength. It's kind of on the border of that for the most part, so I actually wouldn't be surprised within the next update, which will be a couple hours after this video is uploaded. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually turn this into a tropical storm in itself, but we do have some very nice indications of a center of low pressure right within here, and this is a organized tropical system. Now, we also do have some other images here of the ASCAT winds, because there are some instances to where, as I mentioned, they make a pass and they don't get the entire tropical system. So there's one side of the tropical system, and then here is, well, it's kind of the same side, but really interesting to make a note of is that there are some instances where if we actually look really closely, there is some flags that do look like this, and this is an indication of 50 knots or 58 miles per hour, which is relatively close to 60 miles per hour. So this could indicate that we do have a bit stronger activity, especially on the northwestern quadrant, or the northeastern quadrant, I should say, which is typically where the strongest area of a tropical system is. So just one thing to note with all of these winds out in front of this with this storm. Microwave imagery, same thing that is with the infrared satellite. It indicates some very high cold cloud tops with this, a very well-defined center area of low pressure with this little eye. A lot of the activity typically is on the southern half of this storm, not really as much activity on the northern half, with maybe some showers and thunderstorms on the northern band with this. But otherwise, we do have a center area of low pressure, that eye that I would typically want to look for real organization with these tropical systems. Now, here's the spaghetti models with the GEFS, and we actually do have the big island right here that is in sight. So this tropical system could potentially be making its way off into that general vicinity. And I was talking about how this thing will most likely start to move off to the west here as it continues to move along within its life cycle. And the GEFS actually thinks that that is most likely going to be the case. The Euro, if we go over to that, same thing. They do also think that this will head off to the west as well. They think that it will most likely deteriorate quicker than the GEFS does. But still, one thing to make a note of is that the remnants of this tropical system will eventually be heading off to the west and possibly off towards the islands of Hawaii. Same thing with the multi-spaghetti models, same consensus as the Euro and GEFS. Here's the intensity guidance, and most of the models think that it will be going into a weakening trend, heading into a tropical storm, even into a tropical depression as most of these storms go about. If we ignore the outliers, there are a lot of these models that think it will just move along the same path to where within the next 3 days, it will most likely become a tropical depression, maybe even a low-end tropical storm. And yeah, it's just, this speaks for itself more or less as to what they think Hilda is most likely going to do. Now, if we take a look at the wide view of the Pacific here, with these with this model run of the GFS, there's also these couple tropical systems that you can see on here. There isn't really all too much. You have these high pressures with a lot of dry air out here. Nice little trough out in front of the high pressure, shortwave trough, I should say, if you take a look at this right here. You can see that this is basically kind of prohibiting a lot of activity to reach Hawaii. So that's the reason why most of the stuff is going to start to weaken. But you can't really tell what all is what with this cluster of thunderstorms. So if we take a look at the pressure anomaly here, this next image, you can see here's your 3 areas of interest. We have Ignacio, we have Hilda, and we have our remnants of TD9E. And this right here is in a decent environment. If we take a look at the sea surface temperatures here, very warm sea surface temperatures across the board. These reds, even if you're in the orange or in the red, you're typically in some good warm waters for tropical system development, even sustainability, even intensification in some spots. We saw Hilda, intensify into a hurricane within these same waters. So anything is really possible within that regard. But the one thing that I was talking about is there is going to be a lot of wind shear, and there is a lot of it with this trough here. I mean, look at this. We have some wind shear values almost in upwards of 90 knots, even almost, well, we actually do have it in upwards of 90 knots, 91 knots in some of these areas. And so if these tropical systems do end up going off to the north and west as they are anticipated, they will be interacting with that wind shear. And what wind shear does to tropical systems is it basically pushes those thunderstorms away from the center area of low pressure, making them not exactly tropical anymore and more or less a wind threat. So that's the reason why tropical systems more or less don't exactly like wind shear, is because it displaces all the thunderstorms and it doesn't allow them to continue to intensify further. So if we go back to the simulated radar, simulated reflectivity here, you can see Ignacio then begins to deteriorate. Hilda's still there. The remnants are still right within that general vicinity. Play it on through Tuesday into the latter stages of the week. You can see it does start to kind of organize a bit more with that remnant of tropical depression, not 9E, and it actually becomes stronger than Hilda at one instance. Low pressure here of 995 millibars with that system. It's in decent sea surface temperature still, whereas Hilda still continues to move off into that low sea surface temperatures. Not exactly all too favorable once you get into the yellows and the greens. Very unfavorable once you head into blues and purples. So just an interesting thing to note is that it's kind of walking a tightrope. And if you fall off the tightrope, specifically off into these colder waters, you will most likely start to deteriorate. Deteriorate as the continue to move about within your lifespan. But if you stay within the tightrope, then you should be all right for the most part. Wind shear here, same old, same old. Here's your trough that I was talking about, and this will basically be creating some pretty strong wind shear out in front of these tropical systems. So if this, as I said, continues to move off to the west, it might begin to deteriorate because these thunderstorms will be displaced from the low pressure, and so there won't really be a whole lot of intensification further on. So if we go back to Thursday here, this is the frame for Thursday, August 5th, more or less in the afternoon or evening. Here's Hilda, here's the remnants, and then here's Friday. Oh boy, where did Hilda go? Well, Hilda kind of deteriorated. I mean, here's Hilda a little bit, but it's just gone for the most part. Here is also your remnants as a 992 millibar system, so it's definitely a tropical storm by then, according to the GFS. But then it kind of stalls a little bit and then deteriorates further. So by the weekend here, this weekend, it'll begin to kind of become a post-tropical cyclone. And even as this continues to get closer and closer to Hawaii, it's not expected to bring a whole lot of rain, a whole lot of activity. And even by, say, Tuesday, you can see that it starts to kind of interact with the island. So that's more or less the preliminary as to when I think these storms will most likely begin to interact with the islands of Hawaii. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about here that I hinted a little bit earlier on in the video is that there is this tropical system right here that is expected to form, and that's the area of interest that has a 20% chance of formation over the next 5 days. This will most likely be a tropical system of its own, whether it's a hurricane or a tropical storm. That's unknown at this time, but it is expected to move off to the north and west and bring a lot of moisture up along the coast of Mexico into the general vicinity of the south and west. So potentially some more wet conditions there for you all. Maybe some more flash flooding over areas that have already seen wildfires could be expected with this by the end, by 2 weeks from now. I'd say 2 weeks from now is when you guys could start to see your activity again. Now, here is the Atlantic Basin, and there isn't really too much to talk about besides that one area of interest. We got the loop here for the GFS simulated radar from August 2nd to August 18th, and there isn't really a whole lot to talk about. I mean, you know, if we take a look through here, there's just not a whole lot in the Atlantic. Here's the tropical system that I was talking about for you all. That's going to be moving up the coast of Mexico, but it's just not exactly doing a whole lot here. And if we go back here, here is August 4th. If we take a look at the top part of our screen, here's our tropical system that is of interest, and it's kind of just meandering there. It's not exactly the strongest thing in the world, but it's not exactly, you know, anything to where we can just completely discredit it. And so there's your tropical wave. There's your tropical wave that comes off of Africa. As this continues to progress within its lifespan, it does move off to the west a bit more. It organizes a little bit further. You can see here's your area of low pressure that begins to start to form with your a lot of your moisture swirling in with these bands. And this is what we got to watch out for. This is the time of year where we see a lot of these tropical waves from Africa, the repetitive action of a lot of these low pressure systems coming off of Africa into these warm waters of the Atlantic, starting to gain traction with a lot of moisture, a lot of thunderstorm activity, becoming tropical systems, getting closer and closer towards the Caribbean and or the Caribbean, I should say, potentially getting stronger and stronger to maybe even hurricanes. And then whether that goes off, you know, closer towards the eastern coast or the Gulf of Mexico, that is still to be determined. But that's just that time of year to where we're going to get a lot more of this activity. And expect that map that we saw earlier from the Atlantic to start to fill up with all sorts of different colors and names of storms here by August, mid-August into late August and September. So, but looking at it for now, there isn't really too much to watch out for. Even that tropical wave kind of just, you know, sits around, doesn't really do a whole lot. But because there is an area of enhanced moisture here, I'm thinking that this is going to be more or less an area that we're really going to have to watch out for. You know, whether or not this thing could continue to materialize into a bona fide tropical system, as I said, a little too far out to say. But this, according to the GFS, does seem to head off into the northern portions of the Greater Antilles and eventually off towards the coast. So I'm expecting potentially something to at least get close enough to the coast to be something to watch. Whether or not this rides up the coast exactly, or this just ends up going towards Bermuda, that is, you know, still, as I said, to be determined. Very far out. So we're just going to be looking at all sorts of possibilities as to how this can progress. But other than that, that's the only thing to watch out for. And the reason why that's the case here is if we actually go to this thing that I am wanting to show you all, this is the velocity potential forecast. A lot of vorticity that is created with this, with velocity. Vorticity creates a lot of velocity. Just remember that. These greens indicate a lot of velocity, a lot of rising motion in the air. These oranges indicate a lot of non-rising air, very stable air, more or less, that will prohibit tropical systems to form. And so if we see the general consensus from these two models, the imperial wave propagation and the CFS, the climate forecasting system version 2, you can see within the time frame of from 5 days from now, which will most likely be the end of this week, into the weekend, all the way throughout until day 20, which will most likely be the mid to late stages of August, from probably the 15th and further. You can see that there is a window of opportunity here to where there could be some tropical activity within the Atlantic again. And there is even a lingering taste from the imperial wave propagation to where you can see within the Gulf of Mexico, this continues to stay green right within here. A lot of rising motion in the atmosphere here. And so you could potentially even get some tropical systems from the Gulf of Mexico to sprout and even create impacts within the Gulf of Mexico. So all different areas that we really have to watch out for within this, within these models that are telling us that it will most likely start to amplify in the mid part of August into the beginning of September. So if we want to try and look at velocity, or at least vorticity, what better way to do it with these models that we already have? So here's the GFS 850 millibar vorticity, which is about 1 kilometer above ground level. And the more concentrated the vorticity is, the more organized the tropical system really is. For instance, this left-hand side over here, that's the tropical system that I was talking about in the Pacific. You can see how consolidate, how dark red it is. That's what we really want to watch out for in order for some tropical activity. So there's our tropical wave that moved about earlier. Well, actually go back to the beginning of the... yeah, here it is. So here's your tropical wave that we were talking about originally, which has got the 10% chance of formation over the next 2 days, 20% over the next 5 days. And then as this continues to progress, we're going to be able to see another tropical wave over here in Africa that'll come off the coast and potentially be another wave of activity. And so we'll watch that here within the next few minutes. Go back, please. So there you are. Here's your other wave that we're going to be watching. This will be right around the August 12th vicinity. August 12th, August 13th. It'll be another wave that'll come off. So you'll have one wave right here, one wave over here, and then you'll also have some enhanced activity over here in the Gulf of Mexico, as we've all been talking about from those from the velocity potential in the previous slide. So as this continues to move about, you can see how this starts to kind of meander through. I still, for whatever reason, cannot control my slides correctly today. But here's your remnants of that first wave. Here's your second wave right here. You can tell because of the little loop like this is a short wave trough that we like to call. And so that's where a general area of low pressure could be. And so we're really going to have to watch out for this as this gets closer and closer. There even is, if I go back, I still can't control my things correctly. There even is a little area of interest here in the Gulf of Mexico. This is in the latter stages of the model, so don't take this as concrete, going to happen. But there is some activity here within this model of the GFS vorticity here. Around August 18th, the potential for your tropical activity is finally there, and it's even in the Gulf of Mexico, where there is a lot of favorable conditions for those storms to really thrive. So something we got to watch out for, especially from the GFS. Now here's the other thing that I wanted to show you all. Here's the Euro model showing you all the vorticity. And earlier on last night at around 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, when this thing started running, the Euro model actually showed off a really interesting thing here. The first wave that actually fired off that had that 20% chance of formation over the next 5 days actually turned into a consolidated storm here, according to the Euro. You take a look right there, and you can see that dark dot right there that continues to progress closer and closer towards the Lesser Antilles and even further and towards the Bahamas and even Bermuda. But the other run that just occurred here off of the 12Z run doesn't exactly have that. It's kind of more or less a deteriorated, mess, more or less. And then you also have that second tropical wave that I was talking about here that is kind of firing off the coast of Africa as well. So here's your multiple tropical wave activity that's going to be continuing to surge on through. And as I said, it's that time of year that's really going to start to really kick off more or less with all of this. So something to really watch out for. I'll keep you guys up to date as we get closer and closer. All right, part 3. We went through a long part 2. Here's part 3. And here's your earthquakes across the board here, across the globe. A couple things that I want to make a note of. As of recently, there has been a couple of strong earthquakes over here, just off the coast of Indonesia, along this plate here. We got a 5.8, a 4.6, and a 4.5, all within this general area. Relatively close to the surface, even a 5.2 right within there, 4.6, 4.5, 5.2, and 5.8, depths of 10 kilometers, very much so at the surface. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people felt that over there. Nothing exactly all too significant over there, but you can see how things have progressed from that 8.2 earthquake that was in Alaska, and how that kind of created a little domino effect across the rest of the world. A lot of activity over here across portions of southern Asia into southern Europe, heading into the Mediterranean, a plethora of magnitude 4 earthquakes over there. A lot of activity over here in Puerto Rico, a lot of 2 and 3 magnitude earthquakes. Even some areas over here across the coast of Chile, not as strong as it once was with magnitude 4 earthquakes. Did have a bunch of magnitude 5 earthquakes before, but not exactly all too much. And then this is the thing that I wanted to talk about here, the U.S., as to how this thing has really amplified as of late. A plethora of 2 to 3 magnitude earthquakes across the board here in California. A lot of them are at the surface too. You can notice how a lot of these rings are not exactly up above the earth, similar to the one down here where my cursor is. A lot of these are relatively close to the earth, and when you see that, that means that there's a lot of surface earthquakes there. So a lot of rumblings across the board here. Not exactly, major rumblings by any stretch of the imagination, but there is a lot of activity over there, and then there is some leftover activity from the 8.2 earthquake over here in Alaska. A lot of magnitude 2 and 3 earthquakes, some of which are in the upper categories of magnitude 3. So there is some activity, a lot of unrest across the board here within the tectonic plates. So we'll continue to watch out for that as time continues to progress. All right, last thing here is that there are a couple updates for the YouTube channel, and I'll try and go through this as quickly as possible because this is a pretty long video. First things first, uploads will be once every 2 days until either there is active weather, which I'll upload every day, or active weather ongoing consistently, which will be twice a day, or there will be one video in the morning and then a live stream where I will interact with you all at night. Number 2, I will mostly be absent from August 7th to August 14th due to me heading up to Massachusetts for vacation. I will try to upload if I can, but I just don't have the right equipment to do so. Basically, my laptop is garbage, and I can't really do a whole lot on it. I mean, I can try and, record stuff, but it's just not it most likely won't. So, I'm sorry, but I'll be up there. I'll be updating you guys as to what I'll be doing, so if you guys want to, see me up there, meet up with me a little bit. I might be going to the preseason game of the New England Patriots and the Washington football team. So if you guys are going to that preseason game, then we could potentially meet up and just say hi, talk a little bit. So just one thing of interest for you all. Number 3, I will be doing makeshift questions of the day called Weather Takes, where I will ask you all your thoughts. You guys leave it in the comments down below. It would be a good way to engage with my audience and be as relatable as possible. So that's why I did in the beginning of the video, just a weather take of the day for you all. What are your thoughts on what do you think is going to happen in August, and how many tropical systems do you think will begin to, move about? So anyways, that's a long enough video for you all. That'll be it for me. My name's Nate. I also go by HockeyBoy8. If you guys did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family and on social media. Also follow me on social media. Link is all in the description down below. I will see you guys on Wednesday. So peace out, everyone.